This is the Thoughtful Travel Podcast. I'm your host, Amanda Kendall of the notaballerina.com travel blog. Every episode I'll share travel tales from several fellow travel lovers, and together we hope to entertain and inspire you, remind you of some of your own great travel experiences, and encourage you to hit the road again soon. Hello and welcome to episode 199 of the Thoughtful Travel Podcast. And today's topic is responsible animal tourism. We all love, well, I certainly have never met anyone who doesn't love to see animals when we travel, especially to see animals that are local to a particular place. Who doesn't dream of going on an African safari? Or we want to see, the cute and cuddly animals, the pandas in China, or I know lots of people coming to Australia want to get close up to our koalas or kangaroos. But how can we do this responsibly? Obviously, the days of having animals in awful zoos in tiny, tiny cages. I mean, I can remember some of the small cages where we'd see monkeys and apes here in the Perth Zoo when I was a little kid in the 80s. And thankfully, it's nothing like that now. But in any case, we don't want any harm to come to these animals, but what's the best way to do it? There's so much we need to learn about it. I know over the years, I have gradually learnt more and more and changed some of the behaviours or some of the things that I would see and do when I travel. And I think it's really important that we take as many opportunities as we can to learn more about it. So today I have three guests who have lots of really, really useful and interesting and important stuff to say about responsible animal tourism. So I will get straight into that. And my first guest is Julia Salnicki, who has had very interesting times working as a researcher in Africa. And in future episodes, I will share more of her stories about that. But in this extract, I asked Julia what we should know these days about being a responsible tourist in relation to wildlife.
Well, I think one of the things that we, as Classic Safari Company, we will not sell or promote or have anything to do with is the issue of walking with lion cubs. So many, I think mostly Zimbabwe, Botswana, that area, Southern Africa, have had some really bad press on it. A lot of it deserved. So I always say to people, well, where do you think these cubs come from? They can't keep churning out cubs all the time. And what happens when the cubs get to teenagers or adults? What are they going to do with them? So there's been a lot of press really about that, and many of the operators who used to do that have stopped, which is great. Mm-hmm. If there are any still going, we certainly will not book them, and we don't. And I normally try and explain to clients why, that often the animals that they were thinking were going to be so cuddly and cute, well, afterwards when they grow up, they could be going back. They could be going down to canned hunting, which I think most people know that term, and really putting lions back into the environment. A lot of operators say, oh, well, we're going to put them back, we're going to retrain them and put them back into the wild. I'm sorry, but having worked for many years in Wangi National Park with lion researchers, that is just so fraught with inconsistencies and impossibilities that is not really an option. So basically, don't do it.
Yep.
Yeah. Riding with elephants, that's also, used to be a big thing in Africa. You can walk with an elephant these days. I think that still perhaps has some connotations that you shouldn't do it. I think it depends on the operator and how that elephant's been trained. I would rather not sell it. I believe it. Personally, you shouldn't.
It's not a natural situation, is it, for us to be that close to that enormous wild beast? Yeah.
No, if you want to see an animal, then go and see it in the wild from a vehicle. That's the best way. Yeah, or on a guided walk. There's nothing wrong with going on a walk, but it's with a guide, and you're not getting anywhere near the wildlife. You're there to just observe it, and that's it.
From a distance.
From a distance, correct. Yeah, from a distance. Yeah.
Julia and I chatted about a few more issues that were tricky these days, but then she told me about some really positive projects. And for example, this one, which is a great way to interact with wildlife in the Republic of Congo. Not to be confused with the Democratic Republic of Congo, but the smaller one.
You can go to the Republic of Congo and do the gorilla trekking in Odzala National Park. And that is extremely well controlled and looked after, and if you do go to trek there, you have to wear a mask, and you are only allowed within 15 meters of the gorillas, which is a little different from Uganda and Rwanda. But I think post-COVID, we will also see those particular rules and regulations come into effect in both of those countries. And I hope they do. I really hope they do.
Me too, yes. Hopefully people are a bit more thoughtful post-COVID. I also chatted with Ben Pearson from World Animal Protection, who obviously is an amazing source of knowledge on this issue. But first up, I wanted to get an expert's take on my kind of unpopular opinion that I don't like quokka selfies. So if you don't know what a quokka is, they're adorable animals. They're native to Rottnest Island near me here in Perth. And they look like they're smiling and they're super cute. So for the past few years, there's been this big quokka selfie phenomenon. Just search quokka selfie somewhere and you will see what I mean. It's really taken off, but I don't like it.
Sure. So, we're aware of the phenomenon and also, unfortunately, aware of the fact that while it seems that the majority of people do the right thing and are responsible in the way they interact with the quokkas, there are just the ones who can't help themselves. And we've seen some pretty upsetting reports of people treating the animals badly and in some cases cruelly. So we would like to see much more distance between the quokka and visitors than that. I think also, and that's not only just to protect them, but I think also because sometimes I see the selfies with the quokkas. I think Roger Federer took one recently or something like that, and a number of other people. We're generally unhappy when people use animals as just a kind of selfie prop, when they kind of reduce a sentient being like an animal to just a kind of funny little thing in a picture they take and show their friends on Facebook. It's disrespectful to the animal. It encourages that general idea that that's what wild animals are. Wild animals are just something that you kind of have in a photo or you ride on or you go and you watch in a show. We encourage people to treat animals with respect, and taking a selfie with a quokka in a way that in some cases goes over the line and actually distresses them or harms them is just not on. So I think I'm pretty much on your side on this one.
Absolutely. Having grown up in Perth, even when I was a kid, you would hear, and I don't want to repeat them because I think they're horrifying, but some quite horrible tales of people mistreating quokkas. Like Schoolies Week happens at Rottnest Island, and so you get a bunch of drunk 17-year-olds and, sometimes horrible things happen. So things like that were always kind of part of my, part of the reason. But also just in general, it seems to me, and you can tell me more on this, it seems that we shouldn't be getting them so accustomed to human interaction, or people might be feeding them to encourage them. That kind of thing is not okay either, right?
That's very much the case. And in particular, when we encourage people and teach them about how to interact with wild animals, as in from a distance, one of the things we really highlight is don't involve yourself in things where you're baiting animals with food. So if you're being offered something where, hey, come here and hold this piece of meat and the animal will come to you, that's not great. It just encourages the animals to become dependent on humans and just interrupts their natural cycle. So, yeah, spot on that one.
So it's official, no more quokka selfies. Sorry, just take a respectful picture of a quokka from a distance. They're still smiling and they're still cute. So I chatted with Ben a bit further and I said, hopefully, of course, we all know now that riding an elephant is not okay, although it's important that we know why, and Ben talks about this in a second. But I asked him, what else do we need to know to be responsible travellers in relation to animals?
It's a really good question because wild animal tourism actually makes up a very big segment of overall tourism. When we look at the multi-billion-dollar tourism industry, a large segment of it is actually driven by people wanting to have an experience with a wild animal. Now, as you say, I think the message has very much got through in a country like this that riding elephants is not okay, and that's good. That's really good. But, that's not the only thing that causes cruelty. And really, at the heart of wild animal tourism, inappropriate and cruel wild animal tourism is the problem that a lot of the cruelty actually happens behind the scenes. So you then have this paradox where people who love animals and go to see these animals are actually contributing to cruelty and to those animals suffering. So what to look out for. So take riding elephants. Great. As I said, I think people have generally got the message now, don't ride an elephant. But the reason we don't want you to ride an elephant in particular is because the training process needed to get that elephant to a point where it will be consent to being ridden by a human is just utterly barbaric. It's essentially a process in which their spirit is broken, they are brutalized, they are in fear of the mahout, the trainer who oversees them. The problem we have is that some people then say, okay, I won't do that, but what I will do is I will go and wash an elephant or bathe it or jump in a river stream with it. Now, the concern we have there is in many cases, again, that's still a wild elephant that generally wouldn't be happy to share a pool with a human being or be in such close contact with them. And those animals, in many cases, have also gone through that process. They may have stopped riding them and now got them to do this, but you've still got animals that have gone through that process. And in particular, and it comes back to the point I made about the quokkas, it still kind of sends the message that that's what wild animals are for. They're a sort of an entertainment prop. So you jump in the water, you wash them, you engage with them, but it's all about you, if you know what I mean. It's not about that animal. I mean, these are wild animals and they belong in the wild. They don't want to be in contact with you. They're not domesticated. And when you go to a venue which offers you something like that, offers you an experience of the wild animal in which they're behaving in a way that they wouldn't be, we urge you not to do it. And in most cases, because you can pretty much be guaranteed that the animal has been treated very badly to get it to the point where it consents to that kind of behavior. And then also, of course, there are all the associated issues. I mean, particularly when we think about the way in which animals are kept. For example, we did a report on Bali a couple of years ago, and our undercover researchers came out and said, look, the animals are chained every night on short chains. They're on concrete. The enclosures are absolutely tiny. I mean, an image that still haunts me and my colleagues to this day is this beautiful large orangutan named Nico, where he'd gone beyond the point of being cute. The animals were, the little baby orangutans handled around for a cuddle and a selfie. Nico clearly got to the sides where he was no longer cute and probably dangerous. They put him in an enclosure that probably wasn't that much bigger than Nico. Oh. And there was a point at which we had video footage of Nico clearly had been driven mad by this treatment, just sort of, banging in the cage, grabbing the bars, banging himself in his enclosure. And at one point he turned around and saw our photographer, and in one of the most heartbreaking things I've ever seen, he reached his hand out, and you couldn't help thinking that he was looking at our photographer and realizing that this wasn't just another human being, it was actually someone who cared and was saying, help me. Because that animal is in that cage now and will be there for years to come if we can't help them. And that's the behind the scenes, the reality of wildlife tourism. And so we really encourage people not to do it. There are generally things to look out for. If you are offered an experience where you can touch animals, ride them, jump in a pool with them, do this kind of stuff, don't do it. Just don't be involved. See animals from afar, see them from a distance, see them at most in a high welfare sanctuary or something like the ones that we support, but generally see them where they belong, in the wild.
A few things spring to mind. What about things like, swimming with whale sharks and things like that? So they're out in the wild, but you are not quite interacting with them, but you're close. What's the position on that?
So I think we see that sometimes case by case, and we really encourage people to ask themselves a couple of questions. How close is the boat getting to the whale sharks? Are the whale sharks being baited? In that case, probably not, obviously, to come close. I think we're tending towards an approach which says, look, you're probably still interfering with them too much. I mean, we still encourage people, for example, go and do the whale watching and the dolphin watching experience. We think that's generally okay, certainly in comparison to, say, going to SeaWorld.
Yes.
But in that case, use your own common sense. If you think it's getting too close, say something. Say something to the boat operator. Just say, I think we're getting too close, and get a bit of a sense of that. And obviously do the things before you actually leave, like ask them, give me a sense of how you make sure we're not getting too close to the animal. Tell me more about ways in which you ensure that we're not impacting on the welfare of these animals. And if the guide's got nothing to say,
bad sign.
You go and find an operator. Yeah.
Yeah.
If the answer is, mate, then maybe go find someone else.
Yeah. A lot of it is about doing some research and asking some questions ahead of time, isn't it? And I would like to think that over time, if more and more people do this, then tour operators will take all of that on board.
That's exactly right. I mean, the market will respond to the demands of its customers. And in particular, we say this to people. If you go to, say, a high welfare venue in Thailand and Nepal to see elephants that have been rescued from the cruel industry, not only are you going to have a wonderful experience, but you're actually going to help prove to the rest of the industry, look, this is a viable business model. People want this. People will go and see this. And as we help these venues transition to higher welfare models, one of the things we really need to do is make sure that people actually go and visit them. This is not just an act of altruism. This is actually you saying to all these Thai people currently employed in low welfare venues, there is a livelihood for you which doesn't involve animal cruelty.
Yeah, exactly right. Yeah, because it is all about economics in the end. And if you can find a way to prove that the economics and the animal welfare can coexist in a positive way, then we're going to be a lot better off. And so are the animals.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah. Excellent. Now, I'm just curious to hear what you think. I mean, I don't know. I don't have the right question. But what do you guys say about zoos? Are there any good zoos?
So we have a good relationship with a number of zoos. Taronga, Zoos Victoria, Wellington Zoo over in New Zealand, where we also work. And, when I say a good relationship with them, that's based on the fact that we really respect the fact that they do a lot of really important conservation work. They do a lot of really good education work. And we actually work with them and have a kind of completely respectful conversation where we say, look, ultimately, in the future, we don't see a zoo that has anything other than endangered animals or animals that are being kept here for a defined conservation education benefit and reason, right? A zoo in the future with non-endangered animals, we don't see the future of that. But at the same time, when we deal with the zoos, as I say, we respect all the good work that they do, and we have been working with them on things such as we're talking about doing some research in how people actually experience the opportunity of taking a photograph with an animal. What does that look like? How can we encourage them to do things which mean that they don't go to low welfare venues overseas? One of the conversations we had with the zoos here, which we really appreciated, was we were communicating to them the problem we have is that if someone comes to a high welfare Western zoo and can do something like, I don't know, paint an elephant, which used to happen, or bathe it or wash it, in your zoo, obviously that animal's in a good welfare state, but unfortunately that then means that they could go to a country like Thailand or Nepal and see a very similar activity and think, oh, well, that must be okay as well. The zoos were fantastic about that. They engaged in a really good, decent, respectful conversation with us and started to phase out some of those activities. So our attitude to zoos is very, very, well, I'd say it's a very nuanced relationship. We respect them, particularly the individuals who work at those zoos. We have very good relationships with them and hold in very high regard, while also being open about the fact that, in the future we'd like to see them transition to a different type of model.
So a lot of food for thought there from Ben. My final guest is Louise Southerton, and I knew that Lou had written a story recently about the case of riding camels, which seemed a kind of a tricky in-between thing for me. I didn't really know much about whether this was an ethical or an unethical thing to do, and so I was really keen to chat to her about it.
I think they're kind of like horses. I wrote this story about it recently, and I interviewed some people who run camel treks, and kind of long camel treks, a week or two, rather than day trips. And she had the owner of that operation had some really interesting things to say. I think this kind of brings up a bit an issue to do with animal welfare versus animal rights. And some people will say we just shouldn't use animals. I mean, PETA, the organisation who protects animals, is promoting the ethical treatment of animals, says that we shouldn't be using animals for food, entertainment, or anything else. Mm-hmm. That's a hard line, and I think most people probably wouldn't go that far. But I guess, animal rights are, should we be doing this? And I guess the animal welfare is, okay, we're going to have this animal working for us, so we should treat it well. So it's, But the thing about camel riding is that it's a welfare issue more than an ethical issue, because they have been domesticated for more than 5,000 years, apparently. I guess a similar timeline to horses. So they've been kind of integrated with human culture for a long time. They also they're used to tough lives. They're called the ships of the desert. And apparently an adult camel can travel up to 25 miles a day and carry, like 700 kilos on its back. They can survive for almost 2 weeks without water. They have that fatty hump. Most camels are dromedaries, which have one hump, and they have this fatty hump. It's not water. It's than people often think, but so they can survive for a long time. But I think, that's so because they've been entwined with human culture, they're kind of regarded as domesticated, not wild, and that's the difference between camels and elephants.
Yeah.
So that you could argue that riding a camel is like riding a horse. And the problem is, though, that in many countries that offer tourists camel riding experiences like Egypt, Jordan and Morocco, there aren't any strict animal welfare laws, or they're not enforced.
Right.
So there have been situations of abuse, and that's obviously where you want to say no to camel riding. But I did talk to someone, as I said, from Camel Treks Australia, Karen Ellis, who has been running multi-day treks in outback South Australia as well as in India and Mongolia. And she was actually raised by animal liberationists. It was really interesting talking to her, and she really cares deeply about all animals. And she said that, I think she made a good point, that riding camels, because they're desert animals, really connects you with these wild places that you might not be able to access otherwise. And she also argues that interacting with animals, as long as the animals are treated well, that can teach us how to treat other animals. And it's kind of she argues it's the same as experiencing wild natural places, that if we lock people out of national parks, say, how will people learn to value them?
True, yeah.
So she kind of argues that interaction with animals is important because it does give us a sense of the non-human world and other sensibilities that we might not otherwise come into contact with. So having said that, she did say, well, in my research, actually, I was finding out that because camels are large animals, just even getting onto one requires them to cooperate. So, and they also tend to make their discomfort apparent. Like they have a reputation for spitting.
Yes, I have been spat at by a camel.
Have you? Oh, I'm actually really
like
fond
them,
of
though.
camels.
Yeah. I wasn't offended.
Right.
I just know that's what they're like.
Yeah, this Karen Ellis from the Camel Treks Australia business said that if a camel's cranky, it's probably because people have treated it badly in the past.
Oh, interesting.
So she said their camels, they've got about 30 camels, they don't spit or bite. And she said they're naturally really gregarious and very very intelligent, capable of very intelligent interaction with people as well as other camels, and she listed a few. So in this article, I guess I found out from her ways to tell whether, it had checklist of ways to tell if your camel operator is doing the right thing. And she did say things like, do a long trip rather than a half day or a 1 hour thing, because camels it's less stressful for the camels to have one person riding it or walking with it for a week rather than,
chop
10
and change
different people
every half day.
Over a day. Yeah. The ethical operators will be happy to tell you how the camels are trained and treated, and they often put the camels first, so their comfort and their routines, they try to build the tourism experience around that rather than trying to make the camels conform to people's schedules.
Right.
And just, I think this applies to any animal experience as well. Like, how do the people working with the animals treat the animals? And it might not be, they might not, hit it with a stick or anything, but how do they speak to the animals? And how do they, how you can get a sense for cruelty or kindness, I think, pretty easily by body language and all sorts of other things that happen just, I think, unconsciously. And you just know when you're looking at a person interacting with an animal that there's a good relationship there, or that it's a power struggle.
Some good tips there, not just, in fact, for an animal experience involving camels, but in general, I think, for whatever kind of experience you have with animals when you're travelling. Just some of it is, I guess, common sense, looking out for the kind of welfare and the treatment of the animals. But anyway, a lot to learn there. And if you want to know more, then I would suggest you head to a site like Ben, where Ben works at World Animal Protection, and find out more there. So thank you to all my listeners. I'll start off with just that website for Ben. So Ben Pearson works with World Animal Protection at worldanimalprotection.org.au. Thank you also so much to Julia Salnicki from the Classic Safari Company. You can find out about their tours at classicsafaricompany.com.au. And a big thank you to Louise Southerton, who actually helped me think about putting this episode together in the first place. You can see some of Lou's writing at her blog, noimpactgirl.com. And I'll also leave a link in the show notes to Lou's piece on camel riding, which was published at World Nomads. The show notes for this episode, which will have all of these links and more, will be at notaballerina.com/199. Because we are about to hit episode 200, make sure you tune in next week because it's the first of 2 episodes of listener interviews. I have had the best month interviewing some listeners of the Thoughtful Travel podcast. They have, without exception, been absolutely fabulous people that I would love to gather all in one place and have a huge party with, but they're spread right across the world. So anyway, tune in for episode 200 next week for that. In the meantime, don't forget to join Thoughtful Travellers on Facebook. Just search for the Facebook group called Thoughtful Travellers, or there's a link in the show notes if you want to find us there as well. So be thoughtful about your animal interactions on your next trip. And as always, thank you so much for listening. This has been another episode of the Thoughtful Travel Podcast. Show notes and other information are at notaballerina.com/podcast. Join me again soon for another chat about why we travel. Bye for now.